Hello Internet, Taliesin here, and today we are talking Covenant abilities for every single class in World of Warcraft Shadowlands. Because when the next expansion hits, you have an important choice to make. Your pick between the Boy Scout Smurflords, floaty glitter tweens, 80s metal album cover edgelords, or jobper bitey boys is one that will not only decide the aesthetic and characters that will define your Shadowlands experience, but also the base Covenant ability that you have access to, and the class-specific ability that you get to use too. And swapping between these covenants is not something that you're going to be able to do very easily, so you want to get that choice right? We have now had a chance to test all of these abilities on the alpha, and obviously the alpha is currently super alpha. Like, it's more alpha than Idris Elba in a quarterback jersey kicking sand into some dweeb's eyes and stealing their girlfriend, so things will likely change. Numbers will get tweaked, whole abilities will likely be rebuilt from the ground up. We as yet haven't seen how much of an impact soulbinds and conduits will have on balancing all the different abilities across a class, but I do think it's worth looking at them all now and seeing where we are at, because at this moment the fun, power, and the kind of gameplay that these abilities are even useful in can vary pretty wildly. And if things do change significantly, well, we can come back and do this all over again later, can't we? So join us as we go class by class, covenant by covenant, and give you our judgment on every single class-specific covenant ability ranked. Okay, go. Okay, so I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, you know what, Taliesin? As a Death Knight, there's only one thing I'm really hoping for out of this entire video. Whatever happens, I just need you to tell me that I can go Necrolord, or at a pinch, Venthyr, and that I'm not going to be forced to join the Kyrion or Night Fae, because seriously, Taliesin, look at my cool, scary death face, okay? Look how many skulls my armor has on it. Like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 20 skulls or something. I can't join a covenant called Night Fae, okay? I bet they call themselves a gang and talk about friendship and shit. Look at my scary skull axe. I can't be doing with that, and you know what? That is perfectly fair enough. I understand. And, well, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is that you don't have to go Bastion. There's 3 other Covenant-shaped reasons you wouldn't feel too bad about missing out on Shackle the Unworthy. The Kyrion ability is a single target dot that also reduces the target's damage they deal to you by 5% for the duration. And look, there's clearly lots to like about this too. Mostly, it's uptime. Runes you spend while the ability is active, whether your target is alive or dead, reduce the cooldown of Shackle the Unworthy by 4 seconds. And in testing, this meant I was able to keep over 80% uptime of this ability without even really trying. And 5% reduced damage from a boss for 80% of the fight is obviously pretty useful. But there is a reason this is the first one we showed you, because frankly, it only gets better from here. And when I say better, I mean like much better, with loads more going on. Basically, thanks Smurflords, you tried, but no. The bad news is that Necrolord's Abomination limb isn't the cast iron best in slot that I know many of you edgelords would have hoped. It's got the best flat out chunk of damage that hits all at once, which is metal AF, and frankly what you'd hope for a 2-minute cooldown, but the limb itself is kind of weird and not all that useful in PvE. I mean, it's stupid and it's fun. I think it could be a lot of fun in PvP, where you can put a caster essentially on lockdown for over 10 seconds just by walking away from them, and I like it. Clearly, Abomination limb is awesome, and you'd never be sad that you had it. It's just that compared to Ardenweald's ability, you know, sparkly, magical, I bet they all ride unicorns over bridges of rainbows, Ardenweald is probably the best of the lot. I quite like Covenant abilities that replace existing spells, because it means they become a really important part of your rotation, and something that you use all the time. And Death Stew for Night Fae is Death and Decay if Death and Decay looked like a sugar-induced friendship dream, but was also totally badass. It does damage, gives damage reduction, gives extra strength, and makes Necrotic Strike, Heart Strike, Scourge Strike, and Clawing Shadows hit more targets. It's on a 30-second cooldown, but of course you use it much more than that because it procs just like Death and Decay does. It's just basically outrageously awesome. Blizz will probably nerf it a bit before release, but at the moment it has to be my top pick for any spec. Oh, and obviously as a wheelchair class, being able to turn into a beautiful fairy fox, a galloping death mongrel is pretty useful too. Sorry, DKs. But the good news is that the Venthyr ability, Swarming Mist, is almost as good, doing plenty of damage, giving you dodge, and loading you up on runic power. And yeah, Frost DKs, I'm talking to you. I know how much you love your runic power. It's like a Death and Decay that follows you around. Plus, I mean, seriously, look at it. So, you know, at least you can stay kind of edgy if you want. Kyrion's Elysian Decree is a sigil which does damage to all enemies in its area and shatters up to 3 soul fragments from each. So, you know, it's about as exciting as a new pair of socks, but also just as cozy, and might just end up being the best choice for vengeance, especially in Mythic Plus with all that survivability. The hunt for Night Fae is a charge that does decent damage, applies a root, and increases your fury generation from Demon's Bite and Shear against that target, and gives you the ability to teleport behind the marked target, ignoring line of sight every 30 seconds, which, you know, I'm sure there's going to be like one particular boss fight where that is super useful, but really it's not even that useful in PvP probably. Demon hunters are famously quite mobile, you know, but that resource generation is very good, and even though this ability is a bit boring, I don't think anyone would be surprised to see it end up as the best choice for pure single target throughput. And anyway, it's not boring though, because you've got a teleport that you'll never use. At last, a demon hunter's some mobility, am I right? Necrolord's ability summons a demon NPC, which leaves behind the world's smallest pool when it dies, standing in which increases your attack speed by 20%, which is nuts, and gives you 10% damage reduction from attacks. It's a really cool, on-brand idea with a powerful effect, but here's all the ways it doesn't work. 1, it's not as useful as you'd think against multiple targets, because the summoned demon spawns like 20 foot away and runs in, so the likelihood is that by the time your mad AoE cleaves it down to get your tiny buff pool, all the mobs you're fighting will already be dead, or as good as dead, and that's if it ever gets to you at all, because your party can also damage it, and they will. So all too often your minuscule piss pool will appear far away from you, which will make it look even smaller. If the pool was made bigger, or even just turned into a buff, and the demon appeared on you instantly, this could be worth a look, but at the moment it's just too convoluted to really recommend. Unlike Sinful Brand for Venthyr, which is simplicity itself. You press the button, hit the fool, and then the fool takes nice big dot damage for 8 seconds, as well as having their melee and casting speeds reduced. See, Necrolords, it's easy. It's got a lovely short cooldown, and oh, when you activate Metamorphosis, then it applies Sinful Brand to all enemies in the blast zone, which has absolutely staggering DPS potential in any big pack that's going to stay alive for longer than 8 seconds, so basically any high Mythic Plus pack. Sinful Brand is my personal favourite, but I am keen to see what, if any, changes Blizz will make to Fodder to the Flame. As a class that can play as melee, ranged, healer, and tank, Blizz seems to have struggled to design 4 distinct Covenant abilities which are useful to all of those specs, and as a result, currently Druid has some of the least inspiring choices on offer. And I know you Druids all want the best choice to be Ardenweald and the Night Fae, right? Because of course you do. Imagine being a Druid and not joining the Night Fae. It would be like when your parents made you go to a different college to all your high school friends. Absolutely heartbreaking. So this Druid Night Fae ability has to be good, because frankly, you kind of don't need the sparkly fairy fox, do you? And I think it probably will end up being a really powerful ability, just not quite yet. Letting off 16 spells in 4 seconds is just never going to be bad, but at the moment the spells are so random that the usefulness of Convoke the Spirits varies too wildly for a 2-minute cooldown. Blizz has promised to tweak it so it more strongly favours abilities from your spec, but I think it'd be better if it favoured abilities from your form. How cool would it be to pop Bear Form and then let off a 16-strong medley of Thrashes and Moonfires and Iron Furs, or pop into Tree Form and send out 16 healing spells? Either way, I think it is going to end up in a very powerful place, but the strongest pure DPS ability at the moment has to be Ravenous Frenzy for Venthyr, which is just another DPS cooldown to line up with all your other DPS cooldowns, increasing your damage, healing, and haste by 2% stacking for every spell you use for 20 seconds. Its 3-minute cooldown means that it lines up perfectly with everything else you'll be wanting to pop, especially if you're a boomkin. It's just the obvious choice for throughput. So good, in fact, that they had to give it a downside. If you stay idle for 1.5 seconds, the ability ends, stuns, and damages you. But honestly, that should only happen if you get hit by a CC effect, so maybe not a great choice for PvP. Genuinely though, my favourite of all these abilities so far is Adaptive Swarm for Necrolords. It bounces 3 times, doing damage to enemies and healing to allies, and the cooldown is short enough enough that you can have multiple swarms out and bouncing around at once. But having a swarm on the target also increases your periodic effects on them by 20%. So yes, Resto Druids, you are now even more perfect for Mythic Plus and Arena with your lovely dot heals. And yes, Feral Druids, here is something that is actually good for you, almost like someone thought of you almost. I mean, they were probably thinking of Resto when they made it, but who cares? It's still good for you, yay! If left untouched, I think this is a great choice for those two specs in any situation, but dungeon content in general, and I just like it. It's fun. I've left the Kyrion Kindred Spirits ability until last because it's quite complicated to explain, but also because the entire player base seems to have completely written it off at the moment and is waiting for Blizz to just scrap it and start again. But honestly, I think it's got some potential. It allows you to form a bond with an ally, or yourself, you know, if you have no allies, it's fine, we've all been there, which can be empowered every minute for 10 seconds for you both to gain an effect based on the other's role. So if you're a healer, it works like a beacon. 50% of all healing you do goes to them, and likewise, if they're a healer, 50% of all healing they do goes to you. If you're a tank, it's like Blessing of Sacrifice. 40% of damage they take goes to you, or vice versa if they are a tank. And if you're a DPS, it works like a ramp-up trinket. You grant them one primary stat for every 50 damage that you deal. So yeah, for DPS players, it's probably safest and easiest if you just bond it to yourself so that you have complete control over that ramping intellect or agility. But if you are a tank, or especially a healer, you must already see the potential of this ability, especially if there are other druids with this ability in the group. So I'm going to optimistically perhaps wait until we've had more opportunities to test this in more varied group environments before I throw it in the trash, if that's okay. Another case where Blizz have to think of abilities that work as well for ranged and melee specs, but I think they've done a pretty good job with these hunter abilities overall. Kyrion's Resonating Arrow is the most innovative design, although I'm not sure how much use players are really going to get out of the whole being able to ignore line of sight effect, especially in PvP, where enemies will just, you know, walk out of the AoE. I think it's one of those things that will turn out to be really handy in very, very specific scenarios, like a nice added bonus, but this ability is really all about the 30% increased critical strike rate on enemies in the area, which is just always going to be really powerful and on a 1-minute cooldown. All of the hunter abilities do some pretty beefy damage, but Resonating Arrow has the advantage that it works great across all of the specs, which can't be said for all of the others. For example, Night Fae's Wild Spirits applies a wild mark to all targets below its cast area, which does moderate set extra damage every time you damage them. So obviously, the more enemies with the mark that you can hit with as many abilities as possible, the better. It's an obvious choice for sick Mythic Plus IO gaming fun times, but especially for survival and beast mastery hunters who use a lot of attacks very quickly. Marksmanship's relatively more slow and steady style just won't get as much out of this. But that's really okay, because Flayed Shot for Venthyr seems tailor-made for marksmanship. I admit, okay, I'm a bit of an easy sell for this ability, because as far as I'm concerned, Kill Shot is the best thing about Hunter in Shadowlands. I love it so much that I've told all my friends that I love it in the hope that one of them tells Kill Shot that I love it, so Kill Shot will know how much I love it. So yeah, an ability that puts a 20-second bleed on a target, and every time it deals damage has a 15% chance to allow Kill Shot to be used on any target regardless of health, with 66% uptime? Yes, please, sign me the shot up. I know some of you will consider this ability boring, and that's fine, that's okay. You're all entitled to your opinion, even though it's wrong. I get the feeling this will likely end up being the prime choice for single target damage, and I am more than okay with that. Necrolord's ability requires less engagement than the others, but I still really like it, to be honest. You press it, your cool green disc goes flying off and ricochets around, smashing some faces, and that's that. Button press, faces smash, GG. You need 2 or more targets to really get the most out of it, because the damage increases by 15% every time it hits a new target. But if that's not possible, the damage is still plenty, even on single target. The focus generation is pretty much useless unless you're a survival hunter, to be honest, but that's okay. It's all about that sweet, sweet ricochet. And I know I just said Flayed Shot would be the best for single target, but actually, would it really surprise anyone if it turned out to be the one button press ability for Hunter? Would that really surprise you? It wouldn't surprise me. Night Fae's Mage ability, Shifting Power, is a melee AoE ability, which is, it's useful, isn't it? Okay, fine, no, it's totally useless, unless you remember that arcane mages exist for some reason, and they actually spend quite a lot of time in melee range, so could find a use for this, but I don't know. Maybe a channeled spell which forces you to stand in melee for 6 seconds sounds like your idea of squishy mage entertainment, but to me, it sounds horrible. It has a cooldown reduction component as well, but that reduction just doesn't seem significant enough for me to be worth the hassle. It is perfectly possible that people higher up on the mage skill ladder than me will rock this ability, shimmering around dungeons with their big AoE blast, getting cooldowns up the wazoo, and I say, shine on, you crazy diamonds, good luck to you. For me though, the ability that I want to be the best is Radiant Spark, because it just feels like a proper mage spell, you know? The Kyrion ability causes initial damage, gives a short power buff for 8 seconds, and targets take 10% more damage each time you hit them with direct damage spells, ending after the 4th. So it's a ramp up buff for a class that specializes in ramp ups. Visions of hitting a big pyro or glacial spike on that last hit with 30% increased spell power and 40% increased damage should be enough to get most mages drooling. And yeah, at the moment there are some kinks in this ability, like pet abilities counting towards your 4 direct damage spells, which is obviously wrong and broken, but Blizz should fix that, and it's definitely the most fun spell on this list for me. Unlike Venthyr's Mirrors of Torment, which is just, God, I really want to like this. 3 mirrors that do a bit of damage and slow the target every time they try a cast or ability, with an extra damage blast and CC on the 3rd. It should be fun. It should be powerful, and I think at high level dungeon play, it will be for sure, but obviously the CC and slows won't work on raid bosses, and the damage just isn't enough by itself to warrant using it otherwise. Everyone thinks it will be great in PvP, and yeah, there will be times when you lose arena matches to this ability, but everyone is going to be hyper aware of mirrors for the entire expansion, and will have their macros and keybinds ready to dispel that mofo, so actually, I think Mythic Plus is where it will get the most use, but Blizz, increase that damage and we'll talk, okay? I think for pure damage throughput on single target though, it's a pretty safe bet that Necrolords Deathborne will be the way to go. It's just another DPS cooldown to go with all your others. Become a badass skeleton, do 10% increased damage and get cleave on your filler spell, which again, by the way, is much better for arcane mages since Arcane Blast is considerably beefier than Frostbolt or Fireball, but across the specs, this has just got winner written all over it. And also, I don't know if I mentioned this, but you become a badass skeleton too, so there's that. So with Mirror Image, Rune of Power, whatever your specs damage increasing cooldown is, and Deathborne, get ready for your big damage phase needing you to get through no less than 4 GCDs before you can even start to do damage. Oh, I can't wait for Shadowlands mages, can you? I like the Monk Necrolord ability, okay? There's nothing wrong with it, okay? It's absolutely fine. You throw a barrel, coating all your targets for 10 seconds, giving all your abilities a 10% chance to hit them twice. In addition, get buffs to your Gust of Mists, Brew cooldown, or Crane Kick, refunding some chi if you're Windwalker. And okay, that one's a bit weird, but it's undeniably strong for Mistweavers in particular, I think, and I like it, okay? It's fine. It's just nowhere near as interesting to me as Weapons of Order, which increases your mastery by 15% for 30 seconds, resets a main ability, and gives that ability an effect that reduces ability costs by 1 chi for Windwalker, gives Keg Smash a stacking damage buff for Brewmaster, and buffs Essence Font for Mistweaver. Again, very strong for tanks and healers, but I also really enjoy how it becomes another thing that you have to weave into your already very weavy Windwalker rotation. This is a really strong, interesting, and engaging ability, totally on brand for monks, and I really like it. I just don't like it as much as Fallen Order for Venthyr, which is the most stupid of all these abilities, and I defy anyone not to fall in love with it. Because Fallen Order releases a whole bunch of little red dwarf guys who run around doing stuff for 24 seconds, and like, they really run around with their little legs. They don't care. And seeing a parade of glowy red dwarf monk dudes come dragon kicking out of a portal from across the other side of the room is my new favorite sight in WoW. How could you not love this? I love this, and you get DPS and healing from it, and and even more members for our burgeoning personal monk army, which is really getting quite big now, so any monk would be happy to have this ability, and it's wonderful. It's just not quite as wonderful as Feline Stomp. Go Night Fae, and every 30 seconds, you get to stomp a beautiful shiny tree thing into the floor, dealing damage to enemies, healing allies if you're heals, igniting enemies with fire breath if you're tank, but most interestingly, ripping chi and energy spheres out of enemies if you are Windwalker. And this is where it gets really good, because while standing on the glowy tree of awesomeness, your abilities have a 10% chance to reset Feline Stomp. So in reality, you're using it all the time, and you have multiple glitter sex trees up at a time. It's definitely my current top choice for Windwalker for all content because of that resource generation, and probably the other specs too, just because it's so enjoyable. Basically, monks have got an embarrassing amount of excellent abilities, and there is something interesting going on wherever you may land. I feel like Paladin Kyrion ability Divine Toll is probably the very first Covenant ability that Blizzard designed after they came up with this idea, because basically it's just a perfect encapsulation of everything the system is supposed to be. Instantly cast Holy Shock, Avenger's Shield, or Judgment on up to 5 targets within 30 yards. I mean, tell me that's not perfect. Okay, so for Retribution Paladins, it's pretty boring, but that's still 5 judgments, friends. That's more judgmental than Fox and Friends talking about civil rights protesters, you know? It's not nothing. Obviously, if you are a Holy Paladin playing Glimmer, then you're gonna have loads of fun spreading that around with your Holy Shocks, and if you're not playing Glimmer, then you're not playing the game right anyway, so there's nothing I can do to help you, sorry. And as for Prot, well, I don't have to sell this to you, do I? 5 Avenger's Shield speaks for itself. I kind of feel sorry for the other Covenants, to be honest, even though they're not so bad themselves. Necrolord's Vanquisher's Hammer is the 2-for-1 family value pack ability. Throw a hammer for whatever damage, and Ret gets a free automatic Divine Storm when they cast Templar's Verdict, which I'll be honest, you barely notice because that procs all the time anyway. Holy triggers Light of Dawn when they use Word of Glory, and Prot gets a Shield of the Righteous when they use Word of Glory, which I think feels the best out of all of them. It's cool to be able to throw out a heal as Prot and not sacrifice a Shield of the Righteous. It just feels very Paladin, you know? This ability fits nice and snug into your rotation on a short cooldown, and it's fine. It's just not 5 Avengers Shields fine. Venthyr's Ashen Hallow is insane, or at least it looks insane, and also it's a bit insane. It's on the longest cooldown of any Covenant ability in the game, and it's huge. It damages 1 target and heals 1 target for a decent amount every 2 seconds for 30 seconds, as well as allowing you to use Hammer of Wrath on any target for a nice bit of burst. So in a small to medium-sized boss room, this could be massive in a burn phase, which is where I think it will see most use. Ironically, I think it could turn out better the less targets you have in that huge area. I think Blizz is still fixing the numbers on this, so I'll reserve Judgment for now. Not like Divine Toll though, where I'll have 5 judgments all at once, like pew 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 pew. The ability that I want to love best of all though is the Night Fae Blessing of the Seasons, an ability that rotates through 4 1-minute blessings. Spring increases the target's healing done and received by 10%. Summer gives their attacks a high chance to deal extra holy damage. Autumn makes cooldowns recover 10% faster, and Winter causes their attacks to reduce enemy movement speed by 20% and attack speed by 6% for 6 seconds. This ability is on a 15-second cooldown, meaning that you will have all 4 blessings out at the same time constantly if you remember to refresh them or change the target, and it's just ultimate Paladin, right? Okay, so I know for some of you this is like your worst nightmare, but for me there is so much fun to be had working out who to apply which blessing to and when. It adds a deep and engaging support element to Paladins that frankly you'd imagine is going to make having at least 1 Night Fae Pally mandatory for progressive raiding. And this is the first of a few very support style Covenant abilities that we're going to see in this video, and there's a part of me that thinks that Blizzard is just going to scrap all of them before Shadowlands goes live because of that mandatory feeling to them. But I hope they make it work, because this is really appealing to me and I'd love to take it for a spin in Raid. This is the bit where I admit my extreme bias for the most fun spec ever in the game, Discipline Priest. And I am pleased to announce that Discos come out very well in the Covenant ability arms race. If everything were to stay the same, then my Dispriest main will be going Necrolord for Shadowlands. Unholy Nova causes an AoE explosion that damages enemies and applies a dot, and allies who damage those enemies while the dot is active receive healing. So for Shadow or Holy, the AoE is fine, but not as good as the AoE you'd get from the Kyrion ability. But for Discipline, on top of the healing that your group gets from damaging the infecting enemy enemies, the dot itself also heals through Atonement. Just the kind of hot double dip action we discos live for. Not only is it super fun and super powerful, but it also potentially solves Discipline's Mythic Plus problem to a degree. I think it will probably see a nerf as a result, but I would love to get my hands on this as is for raiding and dungeons, which might annoy my raid guild because Fae Blessings, I'll let you guess which covenant that's from, is shaping up to be an ability like Blessing of the Seasons that most teams are going to want in their raid, allowing 10 spells after activation to also apply damage reduction, resources, or cooldown reduction depending on the spell. Much has been made of how Holy Priest can use their Prayer of Healing to reduce 5 allies' main cooldown by 30 seconds with this ability, and I'm sure you will see that happen at the most extreme or gimmicky end of play, but in reality I don't think it's all that realistic or useful. I think the damage reduction is the main draw here personally, and I still think that a lot of Holy Priests in particular are going to feel pressured into going Ardenweald as a result. The plus side for that Holy Priest is that I do think this is the most engaging and interesting ability on offer. You may have noticed we haven't really talked about Shadow Priest yet, and yeah, blame these abilities to be honest. I think Bastion is the best bet for them, since Ascended Blast now rewards Insanity and replaces Mind Flay, which because it's an instant cast with a cooldown instead of a channeled ability, gives Shadow Priest a bit of space to breathe and move while in void form. And the AoE damage blast at the end is beefy AF too. It's a pretty solidly powerful ability for all specs to be honest, and what I'd recommend for those that intend to regularly play all three. And then there's that tricky little Venthyr ability. Mind Games deals damage and for a poxy 5 seconds causes damage the target does to heal their target, and healing the target does to damage their target, up to a limit of 400% spell power. It does generate Insanity for Shadow Priest, and it's easy to imagine how awesome this ability could be in any number of situations, but right now it is just too limited by that 400% cap to be able to shine. I think Blizzard will improve this ability, and I don't know, look, I'm not predicting that it becomes the most powerful of the bunch. I'm just saying that it wouldn't shock me if that were to happen, okay? One to watch for sure. Before we get too deep into this section, I just want to put it out there that of all of the classes so far, I think Rogue Covenant abilities will probably see the most changes before Shadowland launches. Or at least, I hope so. Venthyr's Slaughter, for example, just doesn't seem to make any sense at the moment. It's a stealth attack that does exactly the same damage as Ambush for the same energy cost, and which then applies a poison to your weapons, which does the exact same damage as Deadly Poison. And okay, so Outlaw doesn't get Deadly Poison, and Subtlety doesn't get that or Ambush, but still, it's not exactly tantalizing, is it? There's okay PvP usage with a 15% heal steal, and it looks totally boss, obviously, but I feel there's not really much point even talking about this anymore, because it has to change. I mean, it has to, right? Night Fae's Sepsis is an interesting idea, which again feels like it needs just a little bit more thought and refinement. It's a dot which has its cooldown reduced by 2/3 to 30 seconds if the target dies while infected, but if the target survives, then it does an extra even more damage and you vanish from sight. Vaguely handy for any rogue, but especially for Subtlety, even if one extra stealth attack every 90 seconds isn't exactly going to blow anyone's dick off, is it? I think this is probably going to find more use in multi-target fights, and if that bug in the alpha where an infected enemy dying completely reset the cooldown weren't actually a bug, then we'd really be in business. All that said though, I actually really like the other two rogue abilities. Kyrion's Echoing Reprimand has received a lot of criticism for being very fiddly, and I do get that. Using the ability causes damage and lights up either your second, third, or fourth combo point slot. And if you activate a finishing move using that many combo points, then it will do damage as if you used 7 combo points. And all the criticism is true. Rogues don't really have all that much control over their combo points, especially in high damage phases where they have various combo point increasing buffs affecting them. But you've got plenty of time to use this ability once the combo point lights up, and I really hope that it ends up being the good single target choice that it feels like it should be. It just feels great when you hit it. My favorite though is Serrated Bone Spike for Necrolord, especially in multi-target settings. Having 3 charges on a 30-second cooldown and a charge refunded if the enemy dies with the dot means that you're constantly flinging out your bone all over the place, giving your bone to everyone you can, and timing those uses to give you 3 combo points per shot if you're using it optimally. And even if you're just boning a single target where the damage can't reach its full potential, it's still a great way of regularly getting 2 combo points for just 10 energy, and I think it's certainly the most exciting and active ability that the rogues have on offer right now. Shaman are another one of those classes where I really feel like the Covenant ability which feels best changes depending on your spec. So if you want the best overall ability across all 3 specializations, then you can't go wrong with Vesper Totem for Kyrion. It's kind of like Divine Toll in that it's a perfect example of a Covenant ability in a way. A totem that does extra healing on top of your next 3 healing spells and extra damage on top of your next 3 damaging spells. So it's powerful, predictable, and offers great utility by encouraging healers to put out some deeps and deeps to put out some heals. Actually, this might be your overall strongest choice for Resto anyway, just because that really is a lot of extra healing, you know. And in fairness, Venthyr's Chain Harvest is another one that can be used happily by all 3 specs, and it's kind of like Vesper Totem but more passive and reactive. You just drop that bloody bad boy and it's going to heal 5 folks and damage 5 folks, and that is that. About as exciting as a Counting Crows album, but it gets the job done. I've got a bit of a bone to pick with Primordial Wave for Necrolords because I was really excited to try this ability and see the awesome green cool death wave, but even the absolute most charitable description could never describe this as a wave. I don't know what happened here, okay, Blizz, but when I come back next time, I want to see a big flowing green death wave, okay? This ability seems designed especially to make Elemental Shaman look as awesome as it's possible to look. The wave damages the target enemy and applies Flame Shock to them, or heals a target player and applies Riptide to them if you're Resto. Your next Lava Burst then hits all targets with your Flame Shock if you're Ellie, which is clearly pretty baller, even if it does take a bit more setup than I can really be bothered with to get those 3 or 4 targets. I also really like it for Resto, to be honest, where using your healing wave will hit everyone with your Riptide applied, potentially turning it into a more controllable chain heal, which I think is really fun. Enhancement gets nowhere near as much good out of Primordial Not a Wave though, because it makes their Lightning Bolt hit all their Flame Shot targets, which isn't total shit, but look, Ellie is chucking out mother effing Lava Bursts like they're M&Ms, and Lightning Bolt just isn't as cool, okay? Enhancement does seem, though, to be the best fit for Fey Transfusion. It's a really nice AoE damage spell, but it's channeled, which means there's not really a natural fit for it in the Elemental or Resto rotation. Enhancement, though, you drop your Crash Lightning, you drop your Storm Strike, and then it is the perfect opportunity for a little channel and chill. And even better, the healing AoE at the end is just one button press, because Enhancement ain't got no time to be faffing about casting healing spells, come on. Okay, straight up, cards on the table, I really like the Warlock abilities. Probably the least exciting right now is Soul Rot for Night Fae, which hits the target and up to 3 other nearby enemies with a dot for 8 seconds, which also makes your Drain Life hit all 4 targets in that time. It costs 20% of your health, so you can't cast it below that, but if you then use the Life Drain, it is still a big health gain overall, so it's going to be useful if pretty specific utility. Like, you've got to be needing a bit of health, but not so much that you're below 20%. But the problem is that using Drain Life, even on 4 targets, is a DPS loss for every spec. So it's really only the dot that you'll be using it for DPS-wise, which is a shame because it looks so cool. There is a bug on the alpha at the moment which allows Affliction Warlocks to use this ability with Drain Soul instead, which is a whole different ballgame because that is some proper damage and shard generation to boot. But I'm pretty certain that's a mistake that won't make it to live. Affliction definitely does get great use out of Decimating Bolt, which is a single target ability on a 45-second cooldown that triples the damage of your next filler spell. Bit meh for Destruction and Demonology, but of course Affliction gets extra soul shard generation with their Drain Soul, as I think I just mentioned, so that makes this a really strong choice for them. Warlocks benefit greatly from faster resource generation, which is why I like the Kyrion ability Scouring Tithe so much. It's a very slow 18-second dot, but that's good because it's not really about the dot. If an enemy dies while under the debuff, then you generate 5 soul shards, which adds a really fun layer of gameplay, where you're keeping an especially close eye on the health of the hopefully non-raid boss mob that you've just put it on, and desperately try and unload your shards in big ball damage abilities just before it dies. It's really cool, feels super Warlock, which is ironic because Bastion couldn't feel any less Warlock if it tried, and for pure DPS output, it's probably going to be your strongest choice in raid or Mythic Plus if you're Destro or Demo, and it's still a good choice if you're Affliction as well. But then there is what I think is by far the most interesting ability, which is Impending Catastrophe for Venthyr. Barrels a cloud of anima towards your target, the blood splattery red kind of anima, which is totally the best kind, damages enemies in its path, and then explodes, inflicting another pretty beefy damage dot and either Curse of Weakness or Tongues to all nearby enemies. Now, quite aside from the damage, which is not inconsiderable, the utility of being able to to apply that many curses instantly is just incredibly powerful. There have been two main complaints about how this spell works so far. The first was that if you had Doom on a target, then the Impending Catastrophe curse would replace it, which obviously you don't want to do because Doom is awesome. Or at least Doom was awesome, because Blizz literally just took Doom out of the game on Alpha. There is no more Doom and no more problem. Maybe not quite how Warlocks would have chosen to solve the problem, but the second issue is that the curse distribution appears to be random instead of smart. You really want Curse of Tongues on casters and Curse of Weakness on melee, and at the moment that isn't always happening, which kind of makes the entire exercise a little bit useless. I feel pretty certain, however, that this is something Blizzard will definitely solve, and when they do, then this is the Dark Horse wildcard candidate for coolest Covenant ability in the game, with loads of incredible uses that bring Warlock curses back big time. I mean, even bigger a time than Shadowlands is already bringing them back, and I'm pretty happy about that. I got a feeling that it's going to be a really good expansion for warriors, you know, and these Covenant abilities are only adding fuel to the ragey fire because they are all, for the most part, really strong and fun. Night Fae has Ancient Aftershock, which is basically Shockwave, but with an extra dot and rage transference. The damage is great, obviously so is the stun, but the rage generation seems just a little bit underwhelming at the moment. I'm not quite getting as much out of it as I thought I would in testing, but it's quite likely that when you whip it out on higher level content, and especially dungeons, it will really come into its own, so we'll keep an eye on that, and instead cream all over Spear of Bastion, which does instant AoE damage, applies a ferocious 4-second dot, and generates 25 rage, and tethers enemies to its location. It's basically just a really great warrior ability, to the extent it wouldn't surprise me if it were made baseline for the next expansion, Tuskars of the Black Empire. It's great for every class, in any situation, hilarious in PvP, it's one of the strongest Covenant abilities in the game in my opinion, but it's not even definitely the best Covenant ability for warrior. My personal favourite is Condemn for Venthyr. It's an improved execute which is usable on targets below 20% or above 80% health. And look, I know it's not as good or imaginative or as well designed an ability as Spear of Bastion, okay? I get that. It's a dirty, dirty ability for a dirty, dirty boy, and I am not ashamed to admit that I am that dirty, dirty boy, and Condemn is what I deserve because this is just so much fun. And also, surely it will end up being the highest single target throughput that DPS warriors can take, surely. Like, if you're an arms warrior and you don't go Venthyr for Condemn, then a text box should appear on your screen telling you that your account has been locked and you should be ashamed of yourself. And our final ability today is totally out of left field, Conqueror's Banner for Necrolords. Activating it gives you an awesome looking banner on your back which allows you to build up stacks of glory for using certain base abilities and kills, up to 15 stacks. Using the ability again plants the banner in the ground for a duration of 2 seconds per glory, so a maximum of 30 seconds, and yourself and up to 4 allies within 15 yards of the banner get 20% maximum health and 50% attack speed, which is, well, it's absolutely bananas is what it is. It's a pretty small area of effect, but what an effect. Now don't get me wrong, this is a really fun ability to play with as warrior, which is just as well, because this is going to be mandatory a lot of the time, but especially in dungeon groups. And as I said earlier, it's because of the potential mandatory nature of group utility Covenant abilities like this, Fey Blessings for priests and Paladin's Blessing of the Seasons, which makes me half expect Blizzard will nope out and just get rid of them before Shadowlands even arrives. Really strong group utilities like that are really fun to use. Like, these are really well designed abilities, but they can force players into playing a support style of gameplay that they didn't choose their specs to do. But here's an idea. If you did take those abilities out of Covenants and you were to put them all together in one place, you know what? You've got a really good foundation for a Bard support class there, Blizz. So what do you say? Last minute new class for Shadowlands after all? If you need any more great ideas, Blizz, call me seriously. I've got literally nothing else to do right now. Oh, and there we have it. Our first, but probably not last, look at Covenant abilities in Shadowlands. We'll certainly be back with updates as the alpha progresses, but I thought it was valuable to collect everything together in one place as a snapshot of where we are here in early alpha. I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts thoughts on any of the things we've discussed in this mammoth video, which I think is going to turn out to be the longest scripted video that we've ever made on this channel. So if you did make it this far, seriously, well done. Thank you for joining us. If you like this video, don't thank us. Thank our patrons who give their actual real-life money to make all of our videos happen. They are amazing, every single one of them, because without them, there'd be a whole lot less Taliesin and Evitel. Thanks to my brother at Hugh Richards Photography, who was a massive help in sorting through the hundreds of hours of test footage that we had to go through for this video. If you didn't like it, downvote the shit out of it. Remember, my name is Urban Bohemian. But no, my name is Taliesin from me and Evitel and Anirin too. Until next time, cheerio.